There comes a point when you catch your reflection and notice you're carrying a burden you never chose, a weight you didn't ask for, a story that began before you, yet somehow became yours to carry to the end. You may never say it out loud, but deep inside, you already know it's true. Who you are now, or who you fear you might become, is connected to the man who raised you, or the one who wasn't there. This isn't about blaming anyone. It's not about accusing a parent who may never have known better. It's about something quieter, something that surfaces when you're alone and the noise disappears, leaving a question you've avoided for years. Why do I feel so fragile? Why do simple things feel harder for me than for others? Why am I always fighting battles no one else seems to notice? And the answer, or at least the first part of it, often leads back to your father. A father doesn't only raise a child, he shapes the inner voice that child grows up with. It's the voice you hear when doubt creeps in, the voice that shows up when you want approval, the voice that speaks after failure, the voice that stops you before your next move. For some, that voice is encouraging. For others, it's critical. For many, it's barely there at all. But for you, it may have become a voice that makes you smaller instead of stronger, one that causes hesitation instead of action, a voice that quietly repeats patterns you absorbed without realizing it. Maybe you've asked yourself why you feel uncertain, why pressure breaks you, why you avoid chances that could improve your life. It's not because you were born weak. It's because you learned to survive in a world shaped by someone else's fears. Think about how strength is learned. Children don't learn it through words. They learn by watching. They observe how parents react to life. They learn whether the world feels safe or threatening, whether emotions are allowed or buried. If your father met life with silence, you learned to silence yourself. If he ruled with anger, you learned to stay alert. If he set unreachable standards, you learned that effort is never enough. If he was absent, you learned to doubt your value. If he was unpredictable, you learned to overanalyze everything. If he believed strength meant feeling nothing, you learned to mistake numbness for power. If he never said sorry, you learned that being wrong is dangerous. If perfection was expected, anxiety dressed itself up as drive. If discomfort was avoided, avoidance became your shield. If he held back from his own potential, you were handed a map that taught you to do the same. None of this makes him evil. It makes him human. But it also means you spent your childhood protecting yourself from things you never should have had to survive. That may be why you feel weak now. Not because you are weak, but because you grew up in survival mode. You learned to monitor his moods instead of understanding your own. You learned how not to upset him, instead of how to express yourself. And survival mode rewires the brain. That's not metaphor. That's biology. Research shows that growing up around emotional distance or unpredictability shapes stress responses, confidence, and decision-making. Feeling stuck today doesn't mean you lack ability. It means your nervous system was trained to expect danger, not opportunity. Think about how much of who you are was formed by trying to solve someone else's emotional maze. How you hid parts of yourself because being fully seen didn't feel safe. That isn't weakness. That's adaptation. That's your mind doing its best to protect you with the tools it had. But this is where things get complicated. The very behaviors that kept you safe as a child often become the limits you face as an adult. You learned to shut down emotionally, and now it looks like indecision. You learned to doubt yourself, and now you call it being humble. You learned to avoid confrontation, and now you label it peace. You learned to rely only on yourself, and now you call that strength. You learned to expect very little, and now you name it realism. You learned to stay small, and now you think it's just who you are. But what if none of this was a choice? What if these patterns were decided for you? Because here's a truth you may have never spoken. The way your father related to you became the template for how you relate to yourself. If he never encouraged your dreams, you learned to question them. If he rarely showed pride, you learned to chase approval instead of meaning. If he struggled with emotions, you learned to push yours down until they felt overwhelming. If he carried unresolved fears, you absorbed their echoes. And what you call weakness might actually be inherited self-protection. But hear this clearly. You are not required to keep living out the story you were given. People underestimate how deeply a father's presence shapes a child, not through speeches, but through how he shows up, through his tone, through his actions, through how he reacts when life gets hard, through the wounds he never healed. A father quietly teaches what to fear. He teaches what strength looks like. He teaches how you see yourself. And if he was fighting his own inner struggles, he may have passed them on without meaning to. Not by choice, but by example. You may have grown up believing that holding everything in is strength, that silence equals maturity, that never asking for help means independence, that giving yourself up is love, that working non-stop is responsibility, that exhaustion is just life, that your value must be earned, not felt. But look at the cost of that belief. Look at how drained you are. Look at how disconnected you feel from yourself. Look at the invisible battles you fight every day. Look at how much you second-guess your choices. Look at how long you replay conversations. Look at how uneasy praise makes you feel. Look at the guilt that shows up when you rest. Look at how hard it is to say what you truly feel. Look at how numb you've become to things that should bring joy. This isn't weakness, it's conditioning. People avoid talking about this because it's painful to admit that the person who shaped you most also planted struggles you carried into adulthood. But healing starts with honesty, and honesty starts here. You didn't become this way on your own. Your habits, defenses, reactions, fears, doubts, expectations, emotional patterns, and ideas of strength were learned slowly and quietly from the environment you grew up in. So when people say, "Just be confident," they don't realize you were raised where confidence felt unsafe, where being loud, bold, honest, expressive, emotional, or independent could bring tension or judgment. But here's what no one told you. You can outgrow the emotional blueprint you inherited. Having patterns doesn't mean you're trapped by them. Being shaped by someone else's limits doesn't mean you can't move beyond them. Just because your father couldn't model a certain kind of strength doesn't mean you can't build it yourself. And this is where your story begins to shift. Because sooner or later, life presents you with two choices. Keep letting the past shape you, or choose to shape yourself now. And here's the truth. The moment you start noticing these patterns, the moment a thought appears and says, "Maybe this isn't really me," that's where strength begins. Questioning what you inherited emotionally means you've already taken a step your father may never have known how to take. That isn't weakness. That's growth. But before you can rebuild, there's something uncomfortable you have to face, something many people avoid forever. You have to see your father not only as a parent, but as a person with fears, with doubts, a person shaped by his own childhood, someone who may never have been given the emotional tools he needed. someone who survived instead of truly living, someone who loved the only way he knew how, even if that love left you feeling invisible, someone who carried weight he never learned how to name. Understanding this doesn't excuse the damage, but it does explain it. And when you see where your patterns came from, you stop feeling broken and start feeling aware. Awareness is the first kind of freedom. Awareness is how you begin to rewrite your life. It's how you stop carrying struggles that were never meant to be yours. And once that awareness settles in, something changes. A quiet strength starts to grow. Not the kind your father showed you, but a different kind. A strength grounded in self-knowledge. A strength built on clarity. A strength that doesn't come from acting unbreakable, but from understanding what shaped your vulnerability in the first place. And this is where the story gently turns. When you stop seeing your father as untouchable and start seeing him as human, something inside you softens. Not in a way that weakens you, but in a way that finally allows honesty. You begin to see that the version of him you knew wasn't the whole picture. It was shaped by his past, his upbringing, and fears he never put into words. Maybe he never learned how to show care. Maybe apologies were never modeled for him. Maybe patience was never given, so he couldn't offer it. Maybe vulnerability was never shown, so he avoided his emotions. Maybe he thought seriousness meant strength. Maybe he confused control with protection. Maybe silence felt safe because that's what he was taught. And over time, those parts of him became parts of you. But this is where everything changes. Once you understand where your patterns began, you gain the power to question them. You start noticing moments when you act out of habit, not truth. You catch yourself repeating emotional reflexes that no longer fit who you are. You realize that the harsh voice in your head isn't really yours. It's an echo from someone who never learned self-compassion. And that realization is maturity. Because growing up isn't just about responsibility or independence. Growing up is the slow, sometimes painful work of separating who you are from how you were raised. It's looking at the emotional rules you inherited and asking, does this still help me? Real strength doesn't come from repeating old patterns. It comes from breaking them. And maybe that's where you've felt stuck all this time. Not because you're incapable, but because you never questioned the silent rules written into you as a child. Rules like keep it all inside, don't need anyone, handle everything alone, stay quiet, stay agreeable, stay steady, stay predictable, don't disappoint, don't feel too much, don't ask for help, don't be too much, don't be too honest, don't show weakness. Now look at what those rules have cost you. They taught you how to endure, not how to truly live. How to function, but not how to feel. How to adjust, but not how to become yourself. They showed you how to avoid falling apart, but not how to grow stronger. You made it through your childhood patterns, but survival isn't the same as growth. And this is where courage is required. Challenging the rules you inherited can feel like betrayal. Not because it's wrong, but because your mind links those rules to safety. They once protected you. They kept the peace. They avoided conflict. They shielded you from judgment. They spared you discomfort. But you aren't that child anymore. The dangers you prepared for no longer exist. Yet part of you still reacts as if they do. That's why hard conversations feel threatening. That's why expressing emotion feels risky. That's why being asked what you want makes you uneasy. That's why you hesitate before speaking honestly. That's why you feel responsible for everyone else's emotions. That's why even small choices feel overwhelming. That's why you pull away when you need closeness most. That's why you shrink when life asks you to step up. That's why you seek approval instead of truth. That's why you wear yourself out trying to be the version of you that keeps everyone comfortable. These patterns aren't random. They're learned survival strategies. But there's a moment, often quiet and unexpected, when you realize the life you're living isn't the one you truly want. It's the one you learned to maintain. And maintaining a life that was never really yours is deeply exhausting. So let me ask you something, gently but honestly. When was the last time you asked who you'd be if you weren't trying to live up to your father's standards? Not the father you wish you had, not the ideal version, but the man he actually was. Who would you be if you weren't trying to avoid his disapproval? Who would you be if you stopped fearing his mistakes living on through you? Who would you be if you stepped out of the emotional shadow of his silence, his expectations, his distance, his unpredictability? Maybe this is when you realize your weakness was never a lack of strength. It was a lack of permission. Permission you've been waiting for your whole life. Without realizing you can give it to yourself. Because here's the truth no one told you. You can outgrow the environment that shaped you. You can move beyond the patterns you inherited. You can become someone your father never had the chance to be. You can heal wounds he never faced. You can break cycles he didn't know how to escape. You can create an inner world he never experienced. And none of that is betrayal. It's continuation. It's expansion. It's choosing growth where he chose survival. You aren't rejecting him by becoming more. You're honoring the part of him that wanted more but didn't know how to reach it. And maybe deep down, that's what he hoped for you all along. But this change won't come from sudden realizations. It won't come from one clear moment or a dramatic choice. Real transformation is slower and quieter. It comes from small changes repeated over time. It comes from choosing a new response where old habits once ruled. It begins the moment you pause instead of shrinking. The moment you say something small you used to hide. The moment you ask for help without guilt. The moment you stand firm with calm confidence. The moment you rest without shame. The moment you stop over-explaining. The moment you stay present with discomfort instead of escaping it. The moment you choose honesty instead of avoidance. The moment you forgive yourself for what you learned, not for what you chose. These moments add up, slowly and quietly, and over time they form a new inner voice. One that replaces the echo of your father's limits with something that sounds like you. Not the conditioned version, not the obedient one, not the version built for protection, but the real you, the one that's been waiting beneath the surface for years, the one who wants to take risks without fearing judgment, the one who wants to speak without rehearsing, the one who wants to feel without apologizing, the one who wants to create something meaningful, not just acceptable. The one who's tired of pretending everything is fine. The one who wants to step out of inherited expectations. The one who wants a life guided by purpose, not compliance. Maybe that version of you feels far away. Maybe it feels out of reach. Maybe you're unsure where to start. But every transformation begins with one simple truth. You are not responsible for the emotional gaps your father carried. You're only responsible for what you choose to carry forward. Your father's strengths shaped you, and so did his weaknesses. So did his fears. So did his silence. So did his insecurities. So did the parts of him that never healed. But now you have something he didn't, awareness. And awareness is the first doorway to change. Once you step through it, something shifts. You realize that facing your past doesn't make you weaker. Understanding it makes you stronger. Because real strength isn't about having no emotions. Real strength is recognizing your patterns without shaming yourself for them. Real strength is seeing your father clearly, his best and his worst, without letting either decide who you become. Real strength is choosing growth even when it feels unfamiliar. And that unfamiliar feeling is the sign that you're changing. One day, when you look back, you may see something powerful. What you once called weakness was actually the beginning of your transformation. It was the signal that something inside you needed more guidance, more understanding, more safety. And this entire journey has been leading you toward freedom. Freedom from the echo of a father who couldn't guide you in the ways you needed. You are allowed to define strength for yourself, rooted in awareness, compassion, courage, honesty, and self-respect. And the most powerful part is this: you don't need permission. You can start right now with a quiet choice. Your story moves forward with you, not with inherited patterns, not with old weight, not with learned limits, but with the strength you're discovering inside yourself. And as you continue, you may notice something unexpected, something gentle. You were never weak because of your father. You only believed you were. What you once called weakness was the first step toward becoming stronger than the generation before you. And that strength, your strength, is only just beginning.